lying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. I'm going to dive into a few things here, starting off to do with Obama's gun control that he wants to enact through executive action. Then, after that, I kind of want to get into a clip here, natural law versus tyranny. Then we're going to kind of get into the climate issue. I have an article here, Climate Agenda Goes on Trial. And another thing I want to cover is Clinton emails here. I have another article. So I definitely want to get into all this. But let's go ahead and start off with this, the gun grab. Washington Post, Obama to impose new gun control curbs next week. President Obama will press ahead with a set of executive actions on guns next week, despite growing concerns in the U.S. over terrorism that have dampened some Americans' enthusiasm for tighter firearm restrictions, according to several individuals briefed on the matter. The president will meet with Attorney General Loretta Lynch on Monday to finalize a series of new gun control measures, according to several individuals who asked for anonymity because the plan was not yet public, and announced his package of proposals shortly after that. One of the main proposals Obama is poised to adopt, spanning new background check requirements for buyers who purchase weapons from high-volume gun dealers, enjoys overwhelming public support. A Quinnipiac University poll in December found 89% support background checks at gun shows and for online sales. But Obama's executive actions also come as Americans have become more fearful about the prospect of terrorist strikes and have voiced an openness to having ordinary citizens carry guns. A Washington Post, ABC News poll conducted last month in the wake of the San Bernardino, California terrorist shootings, for example, found that 53% of respondents opposed an assault weapons ban, a record high. When asked which is better reaction to terrorism, 47% said encouraging more people to carry guns legally, while 42% preferred enacting stricter gun control laws. White House officials declined to comment on Obama's plans beyond releasing his weekly radio address on Friday, a day earlier than usual. In the radio address, Obama said he was moving unilaterally because Congress had failed to address the growing problem of gun violence. A few months ago, I directed my team at the White House to look into any new actions I can take to help reduce gun violence, he said in the recorded address, and on Monday I'll meet with our Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, to discuss our options. Quote, because I get too many letters from parents and teachers and kids to sit around and do nothing, Obama continued. I get letters from responsible gun owners who grieve with us every time these tragedies happen, who share my belief that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms, and who share my belief we can protect that right while keeping an irresponsible, dangerous view from inflicting harm on a massive scale. The president plans to make his case for additional gun restrictions in a number of forums in the coming month, according to aides, including during his January 12th State of the Union address. You can read the rest of that at thewashingtonpost.com. Obama to impose new gun control curbs next week. But as you could see, they were talking about, more, to come. Here was one out of CBSNews.com. By this time next year, President Obama's successor will have been elected, but before he goes, he still has things he intends to finish in the remaining 12 months of his presidency. We think the lame duck moniker is dead, a senior administration official told CBS News. Another official told CBS that the president has instructed his senior staff to squeeze every last drop of progress out of the final year. The president will fight to preserve gains in areas including access to affordable health care, expanding the green economy, implementing the Iran deal, and continue normalizing of relations with Cuba, the official said. Here's where he may make some progress. Criminal justice reform, with some of Congress' most liberal and conservative members working together, reform the nation's sentencing laws. Criminal justice reform stands a decent chance at becoming law. In October, a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced legislation that would make some nonviolent drug offenders eligible for reduced sentences and give judges more discretion in sentencing. A similar but less ambitious bill is making its way through the House. The president is planning a nationwide tour to highlight some of the Americans who are doing their part to fix our criminal justice system. At his year-end news conference, the president told reporters he's optimistic the legislation can make a difference and the two chambers can merge their bills into a law he can sign. The measure, he argues, will save money and reduce recidivism while making sure that people who make a mistake by committing nonviolent crimes still pay a price and serve their time. The next one's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Mr. Obama broke with many members of his own party this year when he asked Congress for authority to fast-track a massive Asia-Pacific free trade deal called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He had allies among the GOP, and their votes helped him secure trade promotion authority, which will help speed the trade deal through Congress. The president could sign the deal with the other nations that are participating as soon as February 4th. Then an economic review will be submitted to Congress, where the relevant committees, followed by the full House and Senate, will consider the deal. President Obama celebrates a major victory for his trade agenda as the U.S. and 11 Pacific Rim countries reach a controversial trade agreement. Mr. Obama has called the agreement the most pro-labor, pro-environment, progressive trade deal in history that eliminates just about every tariff on American manufacturing goods. House Speaker Paul Ryan helped usher TPA through Congress and has argued that the U.S. should be writing the rules on trade agreements, but he hasn't said if he or when Congress will vote on the agreement. TPP has great potential, Ryan told the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, that's what you should expect out of Paul Ryan. Now, none of this is free market. None of this is what they claim it to be. It's not a free trade deal. It really isn't, because we're doing this with countries that have very little regulation, very little pay rate. And we are over here where we have to spend so much time. Oh, we got to have safety pictures and little signs everywhere. And, tell that you got to train that guy that he's not to stick his hand in a saw. You have to tell people that sticking their hand in a saw is bad. Have them sign that piece of paper. When you see the amount of regulations, and then you go to these other countries where they have to spend no time, no money, no effort on even half of the regulations that we have. And then they don't pay their employees barely anything. Now, I'm not saying that we should play a tariff game with it, but we do need to cut back regulations here, because anybody that's worked in, factories, warehouses, a lot of different fields, the amount of restrictions and, a lot of it's straight stupidity. And we have to deal with it all. And if we don't, and they come in and inspect you, it's your butt on the line, your company, your employees. And we wonder why there's not much manufacturing here in America anymore. There still is, and we need to support it, but we wonder why. We need to support the smaller, local-owned companies. I think we need to get more localized in our economies. For, the most part, what we can. And that includes ownership. Don't give tax exemptions to Walmart and all these other big corporations, and then tax the hell out of the mom and pop store. Okay, I want to get into this clip. Judge Andrew Napolitano, Natural Law versus Tyranny. This on Mises Weekends, or Mises, however you pronounce it. Mises Media on YouTube, Mises.org. Go check them out. Again, Judge Andrew Napolitano, Natural Law versus Tyranny.
One guest we haven't featured on the Mises Weekends program is Judge Andrew Napolitano, the great libertarian legal theorist and Fox News superstar, and I'm pleased to add, a board member here at the Mises Institute. So our show this weekend features a talk he gave at a Mises Institute event in 2014 entitled Natural Law versus Tyranny, and it really lays out the difference between natural and legislative law. So from everyone at the Mises Institute, have a very happy new year, and we hope you enjoy this great talk by Judge Andrew Napolitano.
When Thomas More had his last opportunity to address something for posterity and knew that his effort would be futile, he was defending himself in his trial for treason. So he's the defendant and the lawyer. The alleged and proven act of treason was silence. The refusal to assert affirmatively and in writing that the king was the head of the church on earth. He made the following argument to the jury. Now, he knew the jury had been handpicked by the king's judges, and the king's judges had been handpicked by the king. He knew that he was going to lose this. He knew he was going to be found guilty. He knew he would be executed, and the execution method was beheading. Some men say the earth is round, and some men say it is flat. But if it is flat, could the king's command make it round? And if it is round, could an act of parliament make it flat? Now, when he was making that argument, he, of course, was not only appealing to the jurors' common sense. Of course, the king couldn't make a flat earth round, and of course, the parliament couldn't make a round earth flat. He was appealing to their understanding of the laws of nature that restrain even the government at the time. Henry VIII, who was about to have him beheaded, and the Parliament, which was the facilitator in his beheading. So his choice between remaining mute at his trial and being convicted, or taking a stand for something as affirmative as the limitations on the government, he exercised that choice by giving this now classic statement of the natural law. Fast forward to the present day. When Moore said that, this was not a novel argument. He is not the originator of the argument of the natural law. The modern day, it's 800 years ago, but the modern day originator is St. Thomas Aquinas, still the best explainer of the natural law. But John Locke picked up on this, and Thomas Jefferson picked up on it when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and James Madison picked up on it when he was the scrivener for the Constitution. Jefferson's version of Moore's phrase is this: we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if Jefferson's correct, if this isn't just some musing, and by the way, the Declaration of Independence is a statute enacted by the Congress. If you go to the first book of the U.S. Code and go to the first page, you'll see there the Declaration of Independence. Probably the most violated statute by the government that we have, even though it's the first and the oldest. But it articulates the view that our rights come from our humanity. What are these rights that come from our humanity? And if they come from our humanity, how can the government trample them? Well, the concept of natural rights articulated by Aquinas is this, that there are areas of human behavior for which we do not need a government permission slip in order to make free choices in those areas. So things like the freedom to develop your personality. I told O'Reilly he should be grateful for that freedom. The freedom to develop your personality, the right to think as you wish, the right to say what you think, the right to publish your thoughts, the right to worship or not to worship, the right to assemble in groups, the right to refuse to assemble in groups, the right to petition the government for a redress of your differences, the right to defend yourself. I must tell you, the right to defend yourself, the right to keep and bear arms, does not protect your right to shoot deer. It protects your right to shoot at the government when it is taken over by tyrants. These are the quintessential American right. I'm going down the Bill of Rights. The quintessential American right. The right to be left alone. Today called the right to privacy, codified in the Fourth Amendment. We all know what has happened to privacy. Let's see. How many of us have these in your pocket? Keep it on. I want the NSA and the president to hear everything I'm telling you. Now, I started by saying I started by saying keep it on. Here's the sad thing. It doesn't have to be on for them to listen to us. When I used to say this about BlackBerries and iPhones a couple of years ago, people would say, oh, there he goes again. He's off his meds. He's hanging out with Lou Rockwell too much. But today we all know this is true. Today we know that our popularly elected government has such profound disregard for our natural rights that it tramples them to extremes beyond which even George Orwell could have imagined in 1984. Without getting into the NSA, another topic for another time. If Aquinas was right, and if Jefferson was right, and these rights come from our humanity and not from the government, things like thought and speech and privacy and travel, how can the government trample them? Well, the theory of our government is that we have surrendered some of our rights to the government so that the government will protect the rights that we have not surrendered. That's the idea of the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. Does anyone in this room know anyone now living who consented to the government? Well, the answer is no. It's inconceivable that anybody still living was around when the Constitution was enacted and consented to it. So right off the bat, the idea that the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed is like government itself, a fiction. The fiction is that we have consented to the surrender of our rights. The reality is that our rights have been stolen from us because the government monopolizes force. It's a sad and terrible reality, but it is reality. In theory, when the Constitution was enacted, and there's a typo in the Constitution, I get in trouble for saying this, the third word is wrong. It says, we the people. Of course, the Constitution was not enacted by the people, it was enacted by the states. But that was never corrected. Nevertheless, whatever surrendered to the federal government was limited to 16 discrete, unique, separate, stated, articulated powers in the Constitution. And then the Ninth Amendment says, just because we've listed a bunch of rights in the first 8 doesn't mean that others. There are many others. It would be impossible for us to list them all. And the 10th Amendment says, just because we've given some power to the federal government, we the states, doesn't mean that we kept the rest of it for ourselves. We have. That's the concept of limited government. The government must stop when it wants to touch our natural rights. And the list of natural rights, whatever you think our natural rights are, give me the list. I'll add 30 or 40 to them. Because these are the things we all yearn as human beings to do, free from interference by the government. If they belong to us as human beings, like my fingers belong to me, then they cannot be taken away by majority vote. They cannot be taken away by legislation. They cannot be taken away by the command of the executive. They can only be taken away if I give them up myself. I can give them up myself by robbing a bank. I rob a bank. I violate the natural rights of the depositors of the bank. I can then be prosecuted and have my freedom of movement taken away. So I have surrendered my natural rights when I gambled that I could get away with that loot from the bank. I could also sign a contract in which I give away some of my natural rights. And I've done that with my bosses at Fox. Theoretically, I'm supposed to say only what they want me to say. In return, they send me a check every week. You know, the checks keep coming, even though I obviously don't always say everything they want me to say. So you can voluntarily surrender your own natural rights for whatever good you choose to surrender them for. But you can't surrender somebody else's natural rights because natural rights are owned by individuals, by persons, not collectively, not by groups, not by the government, but by individuals. That is at least the theory of the Declaration of Independence, and the theory of the Constitution, and was at least the theory of the framers, the founding generation of the United States of America. Regrettably, it is no longer the theory today, and this assault on natural rights began immediately. In the presidency of John Adams, the government suddenly had this bizarre fear of the French. I know this sounds incongruous today, but the country was afraid of the French, so they enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, which basically said, if you want to become a citizen here, come. If you own an acre of land, you can become a citizen immediately, except if you're French. You have to wait 14 years. By the way, if you criticize the president, the government, the Congress, or the courts, you can go to jail for 2 years. Well, how could the same generation that wrote Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, in some cases the very same human beings who wrote that, in fact, abridge the freedom of speech? Because the world looks very different when you're on the outside trying to acquire power than when you have power and you've forgotten about those promises you made to get there. In this room, after I finish, is the Thomas Jefferson of our day, who never forgot his promises. Sadly, an exception, because today the government tramples natural rights. Today the government, to which none of us has consented, claims it has the authority by majority vote to assault those liberties that are a part of our humanity. You don't have to believe in a traditional true-line God, as I do, in order to accept this. You don't have to believe in any God in order to accept this. If you believe that humanity is the highest and best virtuous good on the planet, then you believe that humanity, each human being, is the source of his or her own rights. If you believe, as Jefferson and Aquinas and I, that we are creatures of an all-knowing, all-loving God who made us in his image and likeness, and as he is perfectly free, we are perfectly free, and our rights come directly from him. In either way, the rights are ours and not the government's to be taken away. The Constitution was written to prevent the government from doing that, except when it does it by due process. Due process means if I rob the bank and they want to take away my freedom, they have to give me a jury trial and the full panoply of protections that come with it. The governor can't just arrest me, as the governor of New Jersey did, not me, he'd like to, 2 weeks ago with a nurse who got off the airplane at Newark Airport because she had been treating Ebola victims in Western Africa. Before she could get on another plane to Maine, they locked her up. They put her in a tent in a parking lot in downtown Newark. They gave her a bottle of water, a granola bar, and a porta potty. If she had been charged with murder and had been lodged in the Essex County Jail a mile away, she would have had better creature comforts and a more secure environment than a parking lot tent in downtown Newark. And I made the argument that the governor of New Jersey has flipped natural rights. You see, natural rights, you can summarize them in 3 words. 4 words. The presumption of liberty. The presumption of liberty. Meaning we are self-directed. We make our own choices. It is not our obligation, as New Jersey claimed was the case for the nurse, to prove we are unworthy of incarceration. It is the government's profound, unique obligation to prove that we are worthy of incarceration, and it must do so before a jury of our peers. An imperfect system, but the best system that we can come up with. In fact, when the governor of New Jersey was told, there's not a federal judge in Newark that will fail to give her a hearing, and we have no evidence that she's contagious at the hearing, you better let her go now, because if you lose in court, you know, your friend at Fox News is going to make sure everybody knows that you knew the law and didn't follow it anyway. So he let her go right then and there. And then his buddy, the governor of Maine, tried the same thing. And there they went to a federal court who released her because the government could not overturn presumption of liberty. The presumption of liberty says the rights that we did not surrender to the government, we retained for ourselves. And they can never be taken away from us by popular vote or majority in the legislature or a command by a governor or a president. Now, if the government recognized the concept of natural rights, it would know that virtually everything it has done, certainly since the progressive era at the beginning of the last century, and perhaps even since the Alien and Sedition Acts, virtually everything it has done other than to protect natural rights has been wrong. Question: is there any legitimate activity government has in a free society? Answer: yes. To protect the natural rights of the people in that society. Meaning, instead of assaulting my freedom, my life, my liberty, and my property, protect it. That's what we have a government for. And a government that believes in natural rights will limit itself to those behaviors. Do you know, have you ever heard of, anywhere in the universe today, of a government that limits itself only to the protection of natural rights? That, of course, would be our Rothbardian, Jeffersonian, John Lockean, Thomistic, as in St. Thomas Aquinas, ideal. Will this happen tomorrow? No. Will it happen in the lifetime of anyone in this room? Maybe within the lifetime of the youngest in this room. And that's why we're all in this room today. We need to understand the force of darkness among us. And that force of darkness is the very government we have elected and empowered to impose the darkness upon us. The better we understand it, the more we understand it, the sooner we can be free from its shackles. I expect that when I die, I will do so peacefully in my bed, surrounded by people that love me and faithful to first principles. That will not happen to everybody in this room. Some of you, particularly the young people, must be prepared to die in a government prison. And some of you, particularly the young people, must be prepared to die in a government town square to the sound of government trumpets blaring. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Because freedom lies in everyone's heart. But it must do more than just lie there. Thank you, and God love you.
Mises Media on YouTube, Mises.org. Go check them out. Now, when we look at maybe something that abridges someone's rights, that is tyranny versus natural law. I got one here from the freethoughtproject.com. Disabled Iraq, and this was actually from July 1st, but disabled Iraq war veteran facing life prison for less than 1 ounce of marijuana. And this is in Geronimo, Oklahoma. After serving 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Christopher Lewandowski was medically and honorably discharged from the Marine Corps. He is now... Give me a second here. I don't know why this is playing. Give me a second here. Um, he is now a 100% disabled veteran because of the severity of his PTSD since he has gotten out. The VA had him taking up to 13 pills a day to treat his PTSD. The pharmaceutical treatment was killing him. Early clinical research shows that medical marijuana is highly effective for treating PTSD, and it does not have the dangerous side effects of SSRIs. And I want to kind of add in there that we've noticed that there has been a pretty decent majority of the mass shootings, these people have been on SSRIs. So maybe Obama should go actually start looking at SSRIs. They're tend to be doing the opposite of what they're supposed to do. So you might want to look into that, or what they claim to do. After realizing that the meds were killing his liver, Lewandowski decided that it would be a good idea to try marijuana as a treatment. He began growing 6 plants for his personal use. In June of 2014, Lewandowski had a PTSD episode. His wife grabbed the kids and took them to the neighbor's house, where she called the police to get her husband some help. However, as the case is in so many countless other incidents, police did anything but help. After police showed up, they searched the Lewandowski's home and found 6 tiny marijuana plants. Police then weighed all of the plant matter together, and it did not total to a single ounce. However, because of Oklahoma's draconian laws against growing a plant, Lewandowski was charged with felony marijuana cultivation. Felony marijuana cultivation in Oklahoma carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. According to Whitney Lewandowski, Christopher's wife, the police also pulled up their tomato plants and included them in the photo for the media. Police made it look like he had this huge grow operation going, Whitney said in an interview with Truth and Media. But that was not the worst of their problems. Police then cuffed Whitney and threw her in the back of the police cruiser and told her their children were being taken by Child Protective Services. They were charging her with a felony too. In order to make it look like a legitimate arrest, police told Whitney that if she pressed assault charges against her husband, they would not charge her and she could keep their children. She obviously opted to stay out of prison and not have her children kidnapped by the state. According to Truth and Media, Whitney Lewandowski said that the domestic violence charge does not reflect the reality of her husband's behavior. They're trying to use me as a victim and to make it look worse on his case. My husband has absolutely never laid his hands on me. He is not an abusive man ever. Quite the opposite. He is extremely doting. The Lewandowskis raised enough funds to pay the bondsman, and the family then moved with the approval of the Oklahoma DA to California so Christopher could get the medical marijuana he needed legally. However, while he was in the care of Veterans Administration Psychiatric Hospital, Lewandowski inadvertently missed a court date. With guns drawn and in front of all the children at his child's daycare, undercover cops swarmed Lewandowski in a dramatic raid. He currently remains in police custody in California and is awaiting extradition to Oklahoma. So it's just another, point of the abuse of natural law. This is a guy choosing not to take drugs that have been, shown to have these side effects. And not only, do they talk about the side effects, they tend to pop out a lot, whether that be because you have a lot of people on them or because they are that bad when it comes to the side effects. But when we see a decent majority of the mass shooters as of past 5 years, they all tend to come out with this SSRI. Oh, they're on these because they had depression or they had, problems. Well, it doesn't seem to be working. Again, maybe they should check that out. Maybe they should look at the SSRIs. Give me a second here. Okay. Now, what we are seeing, that they raided this guy at his children's daycare. So not only did they potentially put his children in jeopardy, everybody else that had their kids at the daycare. Good job. Good job. I have a truth in media, the root of police militarization. And this is a short clip, but I really want to get into this a little bit. Give me a second here.
The militarization of America's police forces has captured the nation's attention, largely because of Ferguson, Missouri. But what media has not told you is how police forces got militarized in the first place. And why militarization is about a lot more than just military equipment. The first step toward truth is to be informed. They were images that captured the attention of the entire nation, police responding to protests in Ferguson, Missouri, after an unarmed black teen was shot to death in the middle of the day.
Disperse the area immediately. You are in violation of the state-imposed curfew.
Michael Brown's death triggered looting and protests.
You are subject to arrest and these continued actions.
Now, what stunned the nation was how police responded to those protests. Not like a police force, but like a military unit. Armored vehicles, flash grenades. For millions of Americans, this was a stunning sight on American streets. Now, we've been warning people about the militarization of police forces for well over a year before Ferguson happened. But the rest of the media acted like they had no idea, and maybe they didn't. Here's what apparently they didn't know. It's called the 1033 program, or the Department of Defense Excess Property Program. In short, it is a federal program that provides surplus DoD military equipment to state and local civilian law enforcement agencies for use in counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism operations, and to enhance officer safety. So what kind of equipment are we talking about here? Well, first of all, it's not all weaponry.
Yeah, and that's one reason I think a lot of people come to me and say, well, don't you think we should ban the 1033 program? And I'm actually against banning it completely because we do get things like emergency blankets, emergency cots, even computer hardware as well, things that small agencies sometimes can afford.
Chief Larry Kirk is the police chief in Old Monroe, Missouri, a department just a few miles from Ferguson. He is one of the few police chiefs in the country who actually opposes receiving military equipment.
Well, my question right now is really if we should be having a lot of the militarized weapons that we're actually seeing now coming through the program. Being realistic, there's no reason I'd ever need an MRAP. Most departments would never need one.
The MRAP that Chief Kirk mentions there is one of two armored vehicles that police departments receive by grant through the program. The other is the Bearcat, which, as you can see for yourself in this Bearcat promotional video, is quite the vehicle. So if you haven't figured it out yet, these vehicles are actually part of the Department of Defense program. They're old military vehicles from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Well, after the drawdown of those wars, the DoD looked at this equipment and said, hey, these things are worth $500,000 apiece. What do we do with them? Instead of throwing them away or selling them off, they simply grant them to police departments. A New York Times report says about 500 planes, helicopters, and mine-resistant armored vehicles have been obtained, alongside 94,000 machine guns. Immediately after the protests in Ferguson, much of the nation began calling for police departments to do away with military vehicles. But what the media has not helped the public to understand is that the real problem with militarization is not military equipment. It's the use by police of military tactics. A 7-year-old girl in Detroit, Ayanna Jones, was sleeping on the couch next to her grandmother when a SWAT team threw a flashbang through the window of her home. The flashbang, a stun grenade originally developed for wartime raids, immediately set fire to Ayanna's blanket. Seconds later, the SWAT team stormed through the door and, confused and deafened by the blinding effects of that flashbang, mistakenly shot that little girl through the neck, killing her. In Tucson, Arizona, a SWAT team attempted to serve a search warrant at an Iraq War veterans home as part of a multi-house drug crackdown. Jose Guillen and his wife became alarmed when she saw a shadowy figure standing in the front yard holding a gun. Jose instructed his family to hide in the bedroom closet. He picked up his own gun, leaving the safety on, and stepped into the living room. Seconds later, he was dead. The SWAT team shot him 60 times. Police have still never said whether they found drugs. Atlanta, Georgia, a 19-month-old was asleep in his portable crib in the same room as his parents and 3 older sisters when police opened the door to the converted garage and threw the stun grenade in. It landed in the crib. The 19-month-old baby had a hole blown into his chest and suffered so many severe burns that he had to be placed in a medically induced coma. All of this because police were looking for a small amount of drugs they thought were in possession of the family's nephew. It's not just these cases. According to author Radley Balco, the most common use of SWAT teams today is to serve narcotics warrants, usually with forced, unannounced entry into the home. These increasingly frequent raids, 40,000 per year by one estimate, are needlessly subjecting nonviolent drug offenders, bystanders, and wrongly targeted civilians to the terror of having their homes invaded while they're sleeping, usually by teams of heavily armed paramilitary units dressed not as police officers, but as soldiers. Despite what the media spin doctors are going to tell you, militarization has nothing to do with the war on terror, and it has everything to do with perpetuating the war on drugs.
That we've created so many wars for police officers to imagine. In other words, in the military, they have wars they go fight. Well, we've told our local law enforcement, you have wars in the street. We have a war on crime. We have a war on drugs. If you continue to tell people they're in a war, you're going to create warriors, and you're going to create soldiers that you're now putting on the street.
It's not just about tanks in the streets, although that is the most visceral and extreme example that we saw coming out of Ferguson.
To get a better understanding of the root of militarization, I traveled to Washington, D.C., and spoke to the ACLU director of the nation's capital. Because even though D.C. has military gear and plenty of military tactics, it does not participate in the 1033 program.
This would be surprising to anybody in a black community here in the city, which has been subjected to the militarized war on drugs.
Just because D.C. does not participate in the 1033 program does not mean that military tactics aren't used. In fact, they're used every day through something called jump-out cars.
The jump-out car is a form of policing which is only acceptable in black communities and brown communities and indigent communities. An unmarked car with between 4 and 6 police officers who are uniformed such that once they exit the vehicle, one can easily ascertain that they are actually officers. So they might be wearing black shirts and tactical vests, for example. And they're using essentially an ambush strategy. So they literally jump out of the car and surprise people. And the idea is to get people to submit to a consent search, a so-called consent search.
And see, this is the core issue surrounding militarization. Long before the 1033 program, long before Ferguson, Missouri, military tactics were being used on streets across America.
So in DuPont Circle, for example, which is a largely white community, and where we know that there is regular cocaine use and cocaine possession, you would never see jump out cars jumping out on a group of white men in business suits and saying, hey, you fit the description of, regular cocaine users. That would be completely unacceptable.
And when you look at what goes on in Washington, D.C.
At this meeting, black residents in southeastern D.C. were able to express their frustration with militarized police.
I want to apologize for any poor behavior.
People who live in southeastern D.C. who say militarization for them, not about, again, the idea that so many of us have now been confronted with, that police use military tactics. People living in these neighborhoods say they've been dealing with it their entire lives, and they want to talk about how these tactics have been affecting them, not just for the last few months or even years, but really for decades.
Ferguson is not new. It may be new in terms of for the mass of people who watch it on media outlets. For those persons who live in inner city urban neighborhoods, that is a common tactic that is used.
Orlando Bego was a pastor in the area who says that in the wake of Ferguson, the whole nation was watching the wrong problem. He agrees. Get rid of the 1033 program and nothing changes.
Nothing changes. The 1033 program deals with the equipment, the hardware, but the tactics are still there. And so whether or not you're rolling down a street in an urban neighborhood in a tank or you rolling down the street in an unmarked police car, the purpose of the unmarked police car, as we talk about jump outs, is to bring a sense of fear to everyday citizens who may just be walking down the street minding their own business. This America was built on war. I have a son that's 10 years old. My son today says that he wants to be a police officer because he views the police as a person who serves and protects. He's into action figures, into superheroes. And I dread the day in which the perception that my son has for police officer changes. I dread the day where my son is pulled over for driving while black. I dread the day that my son is stopped and harassed because he makes eye contact. I dread the day that my son is stopped by police because he has a black backpack on his back. These things have to change.
So what you need to know is that, yes, Americans should be outraged at the idea of militarization, but not because police show up in tanks to a protest. You should be outraged at the idea that police for years have been using battering rams to knock down people's doors, throwing stun grenades through windows, all to serve drug warrants. You see, the militarized mindset isn't about gear. It's about tactics. So when we talk about things like no hesitation targets, where police are taught, shoot a child holding a gun, shoot a pregnant woman holding a gun, at what point do we as the public tell police, stop, we want you to hesitate? The problem with militarization has to do with training, not with every cop being bad. Look, at the end of the day, there are a lot of really good cops out there, men and women who really do want to help their communities and make them better places. But those men and women are being trained poorly. They're being taught to kill or be killed, that every suspect they encounter could be their last encounter, and that every person walking the streets of every community is a threat, when in fact, that's simply not true. Militarization takes good cops and teaches them to act like they're in a war zone. But the streets of the United States of America is not a war zone. And it's up to us, the public, to keep it that way. Militarization may be the best example of how humanity is greater than politics. And now that you've been informed, I need you to get engaged. You can do that several ways. If you're watching on YouTube, click.
You can go to truthinmedia.com, truthinmedia.com, or Ben Swan on YouTube. Check them out. That was a Truth in Media special titled The Root of Police Militarization. Go check them out and help by subscribing to Ben Swan on YouTube, and check out truthinmedia.com. Now, we also have things going on where we've rediscovered something called states' rights. We see a federal government that is not truly acting on the best interest. Sorry. Not working in the best interest of the individual's freedom. Rather, they are catering to certain groups that are raising hell, wanting more privilege. And people are realizing, well, we can fix these problems at the state level, whether it be nullification using the 10th Amendment, which I want to get into that some more. But we have one here, Truth and Media, from May of 2015. Alabama Senate approves bill to abolish marriage license. 22-3 vote in Alabama would effectively nullify all sides of marriage. Again, there are things that we can do. And I do have one here. I've seen it from Drudge. Let me see if it's still here. Second, I'm pretty sure it's up here. Maybe. Pretty sure I've seen it. Let's see if I can find them. I'm looking. Here's one, hosted.ap.org. Hosted.ap.org. New laws in 2016 show states are diverging on guns, voting. New laws taking effect at the start of the new year showed states diverging on some hot button issues. Restrictions on carrying guns eased in Texas, for example, but got tighter in California. It is easier to register to vote in Oregon, but there is another step to take at the polls in North Carolina. The opposing direction in the state's reflection a nation with increasingly polarized politics. In the debate over gun control, both sides say their arguments are strengthened by a string of mass shootings this year that includes the December attack at a country health department gathering in San Bernardino, California, when a couple who investigators say pledged allegiance to the leader of ISIS group killed 14 people. Every Town for Gun Safety, a group backed by billionaire former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, is seeking to be a counterweight to the National Rifle Association's lobbying of state lawmakers. Both groups are expected to be active in legislators in the coming year. Whether to raise the minimum wage has become another hot topic in states and cities, with the issue getting no traction in the Republican-led Congress. And you can read more of that. But it did point out what I'm saying. The states are moving to say, hey, we are going to be the ones to take up these issues. The federal government, even under the Constitution, has no legitimate claim to be able to do any type of regulation. Now, many have claimed that states have the right, but a lot of the state constitutions only reaffirm the right of the individual. So, therefore, in those states, they still wouldn't be able to because it would go against their state constitution. Without amending that, you wouldn't be able to go after it. There was another article I did notice. I'm not going to read it, but gun sales surge in Switzerland as Army chief warns, arm yourselves. A lot of that also having to do with the influx of immigrants that are also leaving notes on doors all around Europe, trying to scare others out. I'm not seeing the one that I was looking for out of Drudge. Let me see if I can find it somewhere else. I'm not seeing it. Okay, well, I can't find what I was looking for from with Drudge because articles do disappear with the cycle how it is. Okay, I'm just going to move on here just in a second. Really? Come on. Sorry, my browser is just wanting to flip out on me here. Okay, I got my other browser open here. Okay. Now we might be able to actually do something here. Just getting my articles and everything back open. Okay, I got a clip here from We Are Change. Revelry and rebellion, what we saw in 2015. Gonna go ahead and actually that's not the one I was trying to play. Sorry. Top 5 censored news stories from 2015. That's the one I wanted to play here. There we go. Okay, here we go. Top 5 censored news stories from 2015. Brought to you by We Are Change. We Are Change on YouTube and wearechange.com.
This is Luke Radowski of wearechange.org, and in this video, we're going to highlight the top 5 censored news stories from 2015 because it's important to understand your past, especially if you want to make a good pathway for the future. We definitely want that for 2015. There's been a lot of news, and of course, you've been watching mainstream media. You know all about Bruce Jenner. You know all about whatever they're talking about. What are they talking about? I don't even know. It doesn't matter. Number 5. The top 5 most censored story from 2015 is the very fact with fresh water becoming more scarce around the world, big banksters behind your back like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, UBS, Deutsche Bank, and all these other criminal banksters who are just evil colluding son of a guns are buying up and privatizing all the water rights behind your back. Right now, as we are speaking, privatizing water is a $425 billion industry, and it is expected to become a $1 trillion industry within the next 5 years, commodifying a basic human right by the big banksters behind your very back. And of course, there's no mention of this by the mainstream media, which is incredibly important if you like water. And we all need water. Number 4, on the top 4th most censored news story, came from The Intercept. They actually got their hands on official U.S. government documents proving how nearly 90% of people killed in drone strikes were not the intended target, including this year a 13-year-old Yemeni boy. And then we wonder why other countries, why people in the Middle East don't like the United States. Of course, the mainstream media and the corporate puppeteered militarized industrial complex has been on the mainstream media talking about how effective, how precise these drone strikes are. But The Intercept broke the story this year, and it has not been mentioned by the mainstream media how actually monstrous, incredibly dangerous, and ineffective these drone strikes are, which Barack Obama has expanded within his tenure as president, bombing over 7 countries with his deposition matrix, or as it's really called, the kill list. Number 3, the 3rd most censored story of 2015 is the very fact that the U.S. Senate passed CISPA. They also pushed massive surveillance expansion into other bills and passed the Freedom Act, virtually destroying your privacy and other internet freedoms. Yeah, you think these important huge pieces of legislation that utterly affect everyone on the internet would make headline news. Well, they don't. Number 2, second most censored story from 2015 is the very fact that people on the ground, eyewitnesses, whistleblowers within our own very governments, international governments themselves, have been pointing to the very fact that the United States, who has been hell-bent on getting rid of Bashar al-Assad inside of Syria, have been supporting, aiding, funding, giving weapons to and supplies to ISIS, helping them grow. The United States, within this year and last year, had a 13-month bombing campaign of ISIS, and within that time, ISIS has actually grown. There's Iraqi commanders on the ground showing video footage of U.S. supplies being airdropped to ISIS. There's an Iraqi commander saying how ISIS forces are being evacuated from Ramadi as Iraqi military are having significant gains in that ISIS stronghold. There's documents, there's proof, there's photos, there's even reports of the United States bombing the Syrian government as they were making headway against ISIS, bombing the Iraqi military as they were making headway. Of course, turning a lot of countries in the international world against the United States. Not only does Iraq, Jordan, also Syria, also Iran, now Russia and China are standing in its geopolitical ways. Russia is now actually bombing ISIS and have been making more headway within a few days than the United States did within 13 months. Russia is also stopping the money supply of ISIS by bombing their oil convoys that are illegally capturing oil from Syria and going inside of Turkey. This, of course, has not been mentioned in the mainstream media. The only thing you do hear is about our war against ISIS, but in the reality of the world, that is a complete and utter lie. Now, Russia and other countries have stepped in the United States' geopolitical goal of getting rid of Bashar al-Assad, stopping the support of ISIS, and are actually making significant headway. Now, the number one censored news story, well, according to me, of 2015 was the very fact that this was not only one of the safest years for police officers, with the deaths of police officers going down 14% since last year, but it's also been a very safe year for everyone. If we look at the global trends that have been happening within the last few years, just within the last decade, murders, violent crimes have been going down dramatically within the last few years. Firearm homicides are going down. Murders and deaths in the United States are going down. Domestic violence is decreasing. Life expectancy is going up. Child mortality is going down. And of course, you would not hear this from the fear-baiting, clip-baiting punks. I'm not going to curse, but I want to so bad. These jabronis in the news business who want to keep you inundated with fear so they could control you, so you could feel insignificant, so you could feel scared, so advertising could actually sell you more useless scrap that you don't need. And that, to me, is the official story, the number one story that has been censored, that humanity as a whole is doing a lot better than we ever have done before, and we are getting and evolving into a better human species. You would not know that by listening to the mainstream media that fear-mongers you and shows you police unions and Black Lives activists and divide and conquers you and scares the other living crap out of you in order to control you. That, to me, is the top number one censored news stories. Of course, there's probably other news stories that I forgot or even didn't even pay attention to, but if you know of any, send them in the comment section below. Let me know what top stories you think were censored this year. These are the stories according to me. Of course, we did a full report on this in this video. All the sources for this video will be in the description below. We had an incredible, amazing, we had the biggest year as far as viewership, as far as audience retention, as far as people subscribing and being with us this year than any other year before. Of course, we face real problems. Humanity is improving. There's still a lot of important, serious problems that we are facing, that we are dealing with, but together, with the right information, with coming together, with peacefully, calmly, with just love and positivity, addressing these problems, we could solve them together. It is not impossible. The future is ours. It is extremely bright. Don't listen to all the fear-mongers out there. Life is a lot better than we actually know it to be. And if you want more real information, support real people who are not just fear-mongering buttholes, and support us on Patreon. Vote with your dollar. We appreciate you and love you so much, because without you, we would not be able to do the work that we are doing. I love you guys from the bottom of my heart. This year has been incredible. Next year, it's ours. It's time to take everything back. Love you guys. Appreciate you. And again, I am utterly, humbly blessed to have you, not only as your viewership, but as your support. It's just something that I will never forget. This year was incredible. Let's make next year even better. Thank you again so much for watching. Subscribe. We're going to have a lot more amazing content coming your way here in 2006. And don't forget, together, we are change.
WeAreChange.com. We Are Change on YouTube. Check him out. Subscribe. He puts out some great work. Covers a lot of great events, so check him out. WeAreChange.org. My fault. It's WeAreChange.org. We Are Change on YouTube. Okay. Now I have an article from Reason here. And this one really caught my interest going into 2016, kind of looking back at the past year. And I've also heard and seen a lot of chatter on this subject and what it means for 2016. I got an article here again from Reason.com, and I'll give you my opinion on it. Now, this one is titled, Was 2015 the year libertarianism died? The fall of Rand Paul and the rise of Donald Trump means the libertarian movement is dead. Also, I've a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. Nick Gillespie. I've got a column up at the Daily Beast that looks at the flagging presidential fortunes of Rand Paul and quickness with which some observers have moved to declare the libertarian movement deader than Bill Cosby's showbiz future. Is this finally the year that belief in free minds and free markets finally came a cropper? No, of course not. And the people most interested in pushing such a line have been making similar predictions for years now. Still, there's a superficial plausibility to the charge, especially among those who confuse partisan politics with the real America. Among high-profile Democrats and Republicans, the constituency for more open borders is zero, and there's nothing like Islamic terrorism in France and California to rev up the war machine and ignite bipartisan calls for encryption backdoors or a ban on secret communications altogether. After a few years of an unintended pause, our elected officials have managed to put aside their differences and are once again cranking up spending. But the main case, the libertarianism is finally dead this time, is the zombie walkabout that has been Rand Paul's presidential campaign, and the juggernaut that is Donald Trump's. I think it's a major category error to equate libertarianism with partisan politics, but for folks who believe the only important political question is who is the presidency, who wins the presidency, the divergent fortunes of Trump and Paul tell the whole story. At the heart of Paul's problems, I argue, is that he has shied away from his libertarian leanings at key moments. The reason that time and before that reason anointed him the most interesting man in politics was precisely because at his best he scrambles existing categories. He was a Republican who talked about actually cutting spending in serious, straightforward ways, assailed military interventionism, bloated defense budgets, and surveillance state hysteria, and talked seriously about reforming drug policy and criminal justice. Even more than that, he was willing to call his own party stale and moss-covered, while reaching out to new constituencies. Finally, a major party figure who not only talked a different game but walked a different walk. However, once he started aiming at the presidency, he rarely missed an opportunity to jump on every conservative outrage of the day. Sanctuary cities, Ebola quarantines, Planned Parenthood, the Iran deal, you name it. Whether his presidential campaign picks up steam, I'm confident that Paul will be a major force in turning the GOP in a more libertarian direction in the coming years. Most importantly, though, neither Rand Paul nor Donald Trump's campaigns spell the end of the libertarian movement, which is all about comfort with and demand for increasingly individualized and personalized options and experiences in every aspect of our lives, as Matt Welch and I argued in our book, The Declaration of Independence. Politics is a lagging indicator of where America is headed. It will be the last area of our lives to be transformed, but you can already see the old order breaking down. Indeed. Terrorism is currently freaking people out, but confidence and trust in government, law enforcement, and virtually all other societal institutions are at historic lows, and confluence with bodes well for libertarian ideals of autonomy and do-it-yourself community building. The embrace of gay marriage and pot legalization, criminal justice reform, something which, to his immense credit, Rand Paul has been leading on, and school choice are not slacking, and the past year has seen the beginning of pushback on all sorts of political correctness. Give me a second here. I lost my spot. No, I didn't. That was the end. Okay. Now, that was from Reason.com. Now, when we look at where the libertarian movement has gone, I think that it really has gone more living it rather than trying to vote it. And a lot of that has come from the more party line that Rand Paul has gone towards. Sorry, blow my nose there. The whole national convention and what happened to Ron Paul his last time running started making people realize the severity of the corruption. Something that a lot of us knew, but it was just so blatant. So now we look at what can we do today, and people are not looking at Rand Paul basically because they got someone up there that's playing off of people's emotions rather than their logic. And I've warned people that consider themselves libertarian at all, freedom-loving individuals, that Donald Trump is not going to be it. The reason the establishment does not like Donald Trump has nothing to do with him being an outsider. It has nothing to do with him not being an authoritarian enough. It's that he's a nationalist. They're trying to create a, world government and a world order, and he tends to play more of a nationalist game, which is not a libertarian idea. He is still authoritarian. I kind of relate him to fascism in how he speaks. Look at how he reacts to everybody that tries to talk about things he's said. How's that going to look when, we're supposed to sit down with our country and or he goes on national TV and acts that way about another country's leader that has the potential to start a war with us. Now, he has been in business, so maybe he won't conduct himself that way. But he's conducting himself that way right now. But he's talked about censoring the internet. He's talked about, controlling the border. People are like, well, I'm libertarian, but I'm for border control. Only reason I see for border control being necessary is for the simple fact that we are a regulated and taxed society. If you got rid of regulation where it was easier for you to start a company, easier for you to hire people, easier for you to make a living when you have the ability rather than going, listen, I'm not going to be able to get, $200,000 just to get it open, not counting, how much I'm going to need to ensure I can at least run it for this long and sustain myself. And that's on a low end, starting a little place. Never mind trying to get all the proper permits and regulations and, that never, processed right or it got lost in the mail type deal. You see so many problems depending on what type of company you're trying to start. Well, depending on, how much regulations you have to go through and red tape you have to go through. And then you have the welfare state, which tax money from you or borrowing from other countries. That ends up going to people that come into this country. or people that haven't done anything, haven't tried to do anything, have actually worked the system to get a welfare check. Now, I have another one here from Truth and Media, Ben Swan, reality check. GOP candidates completely wrong on origin of ISIS in latest debate. I'm going to play this clip and we'll talk over it here. Maybe.
For 2 hours. And during the last GOP debate of the year, Tuesday night, the candidates and their moderators said the name ISIS 112 times. That's nearly once per minute. And yet it turns out a lot of untrue statements were made about ISIS and about Syria. So tonight we're giving those statements a reality check.
Assad is one of the main reasons why ISIS even exists to begin with. Assad is a puppet of Iran, and he has been so brutal towards the Sunni within Syria that he created the space that led for the people of Syria themselves to stand up and try to overthrow him.
Yeah, that was Senator Marco Rubio explaining why ISIS is in power in Syria in the first place. Rubio says it is the fault of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And backing up that new and completely false narrative, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
And that's the way ISIS has been created and formed here. ISIS is created and formed because of the abuse that Assad and his Iranian sponsors have rained down on the Sunnis in Syria.
So what you just heard there is a new narrative completely void of facts. Here are the facts. In 2011, the attempt to overthrow Bashar al-Assad by force began. At the time, ISIS did not exist in Syria. ISIS did not begin to emerge until the United States, the Saudis, Qatar, Jordan, and Israel began supplying weapons to so-called moderate rebels, also known as the Free Syrian Army. But if you want to understand what really happened in Syria, you have to go back to 2009. Because in 2009, Syrian President Assad was offered a deal. The nation of Qatar wanted to run a natural gas pipeline through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and onto Turkey with a view to supply European markets. The plan was public record, but Assad turned that deal down. Instead, in 2012, he publicly signed a deal with Iran for a pipeline that would run from Iran through Iraq and ultimately through Syria. By making that deal with Iran, Assad sealed his fate. The Saudis and Qatar began funneling money to extremist groups in order to overthrow Assad's regime. It was all over oil and natural gas, not the oppression of Sunni Muslims. By 2013, those moderate rebels, as they were called, being trained by the U.S. and the Saudis and coalition forces, they began to defect and join Al-Qaeda in Syria, known as al-Nusra, and a lesser-known group called ISIS.
I don't want to be policeman of the world, but we can't back off of this. And let me tell you, at the end, the Saudis have agreed to put together a coalition inside of Syria to stabilize that country.
Yeah, the Saudis are going to stabilize Syria. They are the source of the biggest problem in the region. Reality check here. The Saudi royal family subscribe to Wahhabism, the same fundamentalist Islamic belief system as ISIS. The Saudis have funneled money to ISIS just as they have funneled money to Al-Qaeda before them.
I think that by arming the allies of ISIS, the Islamic rebels against Assad, that we created a safe space or made that space bigger for ISIS to grow. I think those who have wanted regime change have made a mistake.
What Rand Paul said there, absolutely true. What you need to know is that listening to most of these candidates incorrectly state where ISIS came from and what to do next, which ultimately, by the way, would be to repeat the same exact policies as President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and George W. Bush. Yes, it turns out that these so-called new ideas are the exact same old ideas that we've been hearing for the past 14 years. The same ideas that have led to utter chaos in the Middle East. That's a reality check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
something right there. That was Reality Check, Ben Swan, truthamedia.com. Check him out. Subscribe on YouTube, Ben Swan on YouTube. Now, it's no surprise to many of us that, hey, we're going to get the one party warmongering over the same person, Assad. Who else is going along with it? That even though we know Rand Paul isn't going along with it. Oh yeah, Donald Trump. Us continuing to be involved over in the Middle East because we decide here that we will play along with the environmentalists and we won't pump barely any oil out of the ground. When most of the stuff that happens to us here, what we end up finding out is, oh, for every, 0.1 whatever of carbon that we keep out of the air, China's putting 3,500,000 blah 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 into the atmosphere. Oh yeah, and then when I don't know the numbers, but I've seen charts from multiple researchers that also say volcanoes put out, a lot of these volcanoes have put out just as much emissions that it takes us decades to put out, which, it surprised the hell out of me. Not, what I expected, but then you think about it, sending clouds of ash and all kinds of burning material up into the atmosphere, yeah, that might have more of an effect. And we got coal-fired power plants here in the U.S. Scrubber systems, all this. Beijing, you can't even see across the road. But we cause harm, and we should shut down coal-fired power plants. You should drive a mini car. That if semi ever was to hit you, well, yeah. We could just save money and put the whole car into the ground with you in it. It's sad what people buy into. If you want to go out there and be an environmentalist, one, take care of your own property. Two, go out there and go to those countries that are truly doing, harm to the people. When you go to Beijing, go after the companies where, hey, there's technology to clean up your air. You're putting these people in harm's way, people that aren't even associated with your company in harm's way, knowingly, and not putting any precautions in place. Of course, governments would have to allow you to do that. You can't force people to do something, but the population can. And the population gets enough knowledge going, listen, they're making billions off of you. They have the technology to clean up the air for you while they're, traveling the world in places that they don't have to breathe this in every day. So all you have to do is strike. Governments, again, would have to allow that to happen. But if you did it in mass, you might not have too many options. Now, that's not saying go raise hell, go overthrow some government, go tear down buildings or set fire. No. You still have to have dignity and respect. Don't harm your own community. Don't be the aggressors. Be true to your values, be true to morals, and I always tell people one of the best ways to spread freedom and liberty in the message is to also live it. And a lot of that comes down to values. And my faith and my beliefs, set out a basic guideline for what is right and what is wrong. And my beliefs also, put out the simple fact that you are the person that is in charge of your life. It's up to you to make the decisions, and you will fumble, you will fall, you will trip, but your reactions to those and what you do with your second chances, your third chances, your fourth chances will shape who you are as a person, who you are as an individual, and what legacy you pass along. Because it's not always you or a group of you single-handedly changing governments, changing how people view things, changing how your community reacts to situations, how society reacts. It's influencing enough people that they influence enough people that they influence enough people. That's how it spreads. You might be dead and gone, but you leave an idea, a belief. You leave that to the next generation, and it spreads. And people like Ron Paul, I think, have done so much to spread the message that I don't see libertarianism dying. I don't see the idea of freedom dying. I see it growing. And the more hypocritical some of these radical groups get, the more they start lashing out at the hand that basically nurtured them into being, which we see a lot of these groups turning and basically going after the political candidates that are basically a part of the group that created those other groups. And we're going to see people go, this doesn't make sense anymore. I don't even understand what I'm truly fighting for. And I think that's when the message of liberty and freedom will start to penetrate into the minds of these people a little bit more. I have an article here from Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org, putting income inequality in perspective. Globally, both poverty and inequality are falling. Debates about income inequality, the top 1% and poverty typically examine those issues within the context of a single country. But consider a global perspective. This web tool lets you find out which income percentile you belong to relative to all the other people in the world. If you make more than $32,400 per year, you are in the top 1% of the richest people in the world. And bear in mind that the world is more prosperous than it has ever been in the past. Compared to you, the vast majority of people who have lived on this planet were desperately poor. Poverty, as Cato's David Boaz put in this online lecture, used to be ubiquitous. We are some people poor, or why are some people poor? That's always the wrong question. The question is, why are some people rich? Poverty is the natural condition of mankind, but it is easy to forget that. Fortunately, prosperity is rising and global inequality is falling. Even as world population has exploded, the number of people living in poverty has fallen. As a result of spreading prosperity, infant mortality, illiteracy, and malnutrition are in decline, and people are living longer. Extreme poverty is in sight. Prosperity does not, of course, materialize without a cause. The role of industrialization and trade in bringing about economic growth and prosperity cannot be emphasized enough. So the next time someone brings up poverty or income inequality within the United States, keep in mind the importance of proper perspective from a global standpoint. You may very well be a part of the top 1%. Now think about that. Now we see a lot of these trendies. We are the 99. Well, no, in the world you're not. You're the 1%. So let's not call for socialism. Let's call for less regulation, where instead of trying to say we should create a war against these people, let's say we should have every ability and opportunity to make these advancements ourselves without having to pay almighty government. People are like, well, you need regulation, they'll abuse their... Well, most of the time they can pay a fine and get past it and not care. So if they really want to abuse it, they help write the laws themselves. So, yeah, okay, whatever. Another thing is a lot of these things that pay the government so they'll keep us safe literally means going down and paying a license fee, and they give you a piece of paper. How does that make you feel safe? That they went down and gave your local government a little bit of money They give them a nice little certificate thing. They go put it in a frame and hang it on their wall. And that really just saves you from, if it's a restaurant, a cola or a cockroach going across your table. You don't know. And maybe others don't care, aren't that smart, or are used to it. But I know when I've been in a restaurant where I'm like, I don't want to eat here. Sure enough, they get hit by the health. I didn't need the health inspector tell me I didn't need to eat there. I knew I didn't need to eat there. Take a little time to know how things should be, know how things should look, and go, yeah, they're not doing it right. But again, people think, oh, I just don't got time for it, so I'm going to give that responsibility to government. Government goes, yeah, we have to give you a permit now before you can do that. That'll be $325 or $1,000 or $5,000 or who knows what, depending on what you're getting into, how many license permits you need. Oh, you got the money on? Okay, well, here's the pieces of paper. We'll mail them to you. Oh, we lost them. Well, if you paid another $10, we'll send you another copy. I didn't lose them. They were lost in the mail. Well, that's not our fault. Another $10, we'll send you some more copies. But I do understand that everybody can't be expert on everything. And we have plenty of private organizations and companies out there that can provide that help for you. With more of them out there, you have more opportunities. And do enough research yourself on anything that you're looking into. Again, that article was from Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org. Article I want to cover. I don't know if I have enough time. See if I can find it. TheHill.com. Obama's climate agenda on trial. A slate of major environmental rules rolled out by the Obama administration in 2015 will face serious challenges in the new year as opponents look to beat back the president's ambitious policies, a core piece of his legacy. In the lead up to the landmark Paris climate talks in December, an event that yielded a first of its kind global agreement to cut carbon emissions, the Obama administration released a series of sweeping new environmental rules, each garnering both condemnation and deep-pocketed opposition from interests looking to torpedo the regulations in 2016. As Obama enters the final year of his presidency, much of his focus on environmental issues will be implementing, preserving the work he's already done. If 2015 was the year he pushed his environmental agenda forward, 2016 could be the year he looks to preserve it. Here are some of the biggest regulations Obama finalized or proposed last year and how they will be litigated in 2016. Clean Power Plan. Most notable environmental rule issued in 2015 was the climate rule for power plants, an environmental EPA regulation designed to cut carbon emissions from the power sector. The rule is the centerpiece of Obama's climate change agenda and the biggest promise he took with him to the United Nations climate talks. It is designed to cut carbon emissions from existing power plants by 32% from 2005 levels by 2030. Environmental has held the rule, but it has met with scorching opposition from Republicans, commodity groups, business, and utilities. Opponents have argued that while the rule will cut carbon emissions, it will do so at the expense of jobs and American energy bills, which could go up as states shift to cleaner energy mixes. Dozens of opponents sued against the rule the day in October that it hit the Federal Register, arguing the EPA went beyond its legal authority in assigning states carbon reduction targets. EPA's rule is flatly illegal and one of the most aggressive executive branch power grabs we've seen in a long time. West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey said the EPA cannot do what it intends to do legally. The EPA defended the rule as one of the strong scientific and legal foundations and has sought to protect it from the lawsuits. And I'll just cover a couple here. Clean water rule and ozone. Methane emissions. And that looks to be it. Thank everybody for tuning in. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv. Also, don't forget to check out the Amazon store through UCY.tv. Go to UCY.tv, scroll down the bottom, find the Amazon button, and click it. It'll take you to Amazon. Great things, same great price, shipping rates, and it also helps UCY. Don't forget to also check out My Patriot Supply for non-GMO seeds. My personal choice for non-GMO seeds.